Good evening, everyone. I will now call this council meeting to order July 3rd, 2024 at 5 p.m. The land acknowledgement statement is being read by Brittany Drury, Deputy CAO and Director of Corporate Services this evening.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, and culture of the Anishinaabe, the people of the Three Fires known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi Nation, who have inhabited this land from time immemorial, and further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. We also recognize the Métis and Inuit whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. May we all, as treaty people, live with respect on this land and live in peace and friendship with all its diverse peoples. This past weekend, Canadians across the nation celebrated our country's 157th birthday. Each year, Canada Day is marked with nationwide celebrations, events, and fireworks that light up the night sky in celebration of Canada's history and patriotic pride. While we can celebrate all that it means to be Canadian and marking our country's annual day of celebration, from butter tarts and maple syrup, the beauty of the prairies and mountainscapes, to the common sorries, hellos, A's, and thank yous, we cannot celebrate with pride in the absence of observing our nation's very real and complex past. As my family and I marked this year's Canada Day celebrations, I took pause to celebrate in balance of reflection, celebrating what makes our country beautiful and a wonderful place to live, with acknowledgement of the resiliency and contributions of the Indigenous peoples. As a nation, Canada has committed to addressing the harms of the past through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to actions. This includes efforts to preserve Indigenous languages, culture, and traditions, as well as addressing social inequalities. Days of celebration, like Canada Day, serve as an opportunity for all Canadians to reflect upon and reaffirm our collective commitment to reconciliation, continuing to prioritize awareness through education while honoring our country's diverse heritage and the rights and dignity of its Indigenous peoples. Acknowledging the history and contribution of Indigenous peoples while recognizing the impact of colonialism is crucial in moving toward a future marked by understanding, respect, and reconciliation. I welcome staff, council, and the greater Georgian Bluffs community to join me in this reflection as we continue to celebrate calling Canada home while committing to reconcile the sins of the past, one hello, thank you, and Tim's Run at a time.
Thank you. That was lovely. Approval of the agenda. The recommendation is that the agenda be approved as presented. Are there any additions first, though? Seeing none, I will ask for a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Day. Is there any discussion? Call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, you may declare at any time throughout the meeting if one should arise. Moving on to minutes of previous meetings, the recommendation that the minutes of the council meeting held on June 12th, 2024 be adopted. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Winters, Deputy Mayor Pringle. Is there any discussion? I'll call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Special council meeting, the minutes of the special council meeting held on June 17th, 2024 be adopted. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Deputy Mayor Pringle, Councillor Winters. Is there any discussion? I'll call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Does any member wish to make an announcement? Deputy Mayor Pringle.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton. I'm going to put a bit of a list together here of some thank yous to go out for the end of day celebrations we had in Big Bay. So, having had the opportunity to join the celebrations at Big Bay, it was an enormous success. Mother Nature just gave us sunshine and comfortable temperatures. Opening remarks from Mayor Carlton and guest remarks from NPP Rick Byers and Grey County Warden Brian Milne. Thanks to Rick and Brian for taking the time to join Georgian Bluffs. Thanks to the flag raising young ladies, Maddie and Megan, fantastic job, right on cue. Thanks to Heat and Eat for breakfast provided, fantastic as always. Estimated they fed over 200 people. Thanks to Julie Bradley Lowe for leading the yoga exercise at 8 a.m. I am still recovering from the detailed description of the yoga positions from the CAO. Kudos to the folks that can do this. Thanks to the Inter-Township Fire Department again for the visual and attraction for the youth to see, touch, and learn from the ITFD. Thanks to Sandra Winters for giving her expertise to the medical need at Big Bay along with the ITFD on site and the response to the Bruce County paramedics. Thanks to all the staff organizing, preparing the site, taking the time for the event details. On site, we had Haley, Ryan, Zach, and Niall leading the day. Also had the opportunity to join Cobble Beach in the evening for the live entertainment, fireworks at dusk. Highlight for me was a bagpiper playing O Canada. Great crowd at Cobble Beach. We are so fortunate to have the opportunity each day for the sights and views of Georgian Lakes.
Thank you. And the only thing I would add to that was the young man doing the balloon animals for all the kids. They were really different. He was good at that. So thank you for going over everything there. Are there any other announcements? Okay, delegations and public question period. For items on the agenda, any person who wishes to appear before council regarding an item on the agenda shall make written application to the clerk by 3 p.m. the day of the meeting. To register, go to www.georgianbluffs.ca/delegations or call the clerk's office at 519-376-2729, extension 603. And for items not on the agenda, the exact same, but register by Thursday, the Thursday preceding the meeting you wish to speak at, and go to the same georgianbluffs.ca/delegations or call the clerk's office 519-376-2729, extension 603. And this evening we have with us BDO for our 2023 draft financial statements. So the recommendation is that the 2023 audit draft financial statements prepared by BDO Canada LLP be received for information. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Deputy Mayor Pringle, Councillor Day. I will turn it over to BDO now for an overview. Thank you for being here with us this evening.
Thank you. Sorry, just have to. I'd like to thank council for having us here this evening. Tracy Smith wasn't able to attend due to a prior commitment. I am Robin Strang-McCalder, a senior manager at BDO. I have been with BDO for 15 years and I've worked on the Township of Georgian Bluffs engagement for about 10 of those. I also have with me Ashley McKinnon, a manager at BDO, who is also an experienced municipal auditor, and she worked on the file for 2023. Last year, for the 2022 year end, there were significant changes in the auditing standards, which affected us as auditors and how we planned and performed the audit. This year, for 2023, there have been significant changes to the accounting standards relating to asset retirement obligations, Public Sector 3280, and financial instruments, Public Sector Accounting Standard 3450. These standards are going to have an impact on municipal financial statements and note disclosures. Preparation of the financial statements, including all the disclosures in the notes, is the responsibility of your management team. Although we can assist in formatting and making suggestions on wording, all the numbers are provided by your management team from the accounting records of the township. BDO, as your auditor, is required to maintain independence to be able to provide an independent opinion on the financial statements prepared by your management team. To confirm our independence, the audited financial statements are reviewed a second time by an experienced BDO manager from outside of the audit engagement team. Sorry, right now I'll just say I'm just kind of giving an overview of my notes. In a couple minutes, I will have you switch to page 34, but right now I'm just kind of outlining our responsibilities and the responsibilities of management. We would like to thank your entire management team for their assistance during the audit. We would like to especially thank Samantha, Brian Anderson, Lisa, and Niall. If you do have any questions during the presentation, I invite you to ask them as we go. I'd be happy to stop and pause in the moment. As your auditor, it is our responsibility to communicate with those charged with governance, in this case, council. Our report is in the agenda package, contains all required communications in accordance with the Canadian auditing standards. The communication will be very similar to prior years as the content is defined in the auditing standards. I will provide a very brief summary of the communication. So if we could jump to page 34 of your agenda, we can do that now. Appendix A in the report contains the draft financial statements prepared by management. No, we can just stay on this page. I'm just highlighting a few things. On here, you'll see that before we can issue, on page 34.
If you go with the page in your report,
Oh,
we'll
okay.
all have it as a
Okay,
separate,
page
so that's
3.
what- Perfect. Thank
Okay,
you.
so page 3 of our report is the report to council that includes all the required communication. In Appendix A, the financial statements are currently in draft form until they are approved by those charged with governance, in this case, council. The only other steps before finals can be released is receiving any correspondence from legal counsel and completing our subsequent event work up until the audit report date, which is the approval date. I'm required to confirm BDO's independence, and I can confirm that we are independent and can issue an independent audit report. Materiality remained unchanged from planning at $525,000. On page 7 of our report, I can report that we did not find any.
Robin, if I can just stop, apparently
Yep.
Councillor Day has a question.
Certainly.
Thank you. Through the mayor, I did some internet Googling, researching, but I just wanted to confirm that I found the correct information of what materiality means.
So materiality is based on what would be considered significant to users of the financial statements. We use a benchmark that's in line with auditing standards. So generally it is taken revenue times 3%. And if that is considered reasonable, then any amount either individually for $525,000 value or in aggregate above that, we would not be able to issue a clean audit opinion. So let's say around year end, there's a transaction that's happening right around year end. It has to go into the correct year based on when the transaction happened. And if it is, there's also a concept of trivial, which is a much smaller dollar value of around $25,000. So if there's a small amounts payable of $25,000 that is missed being put into the 2023 year end, that's considered not significant. It's trivial. It doesn't need an adjustment. The concept of materiality is anything above that amount must be adjusted and included in the financial statements if that transaction occurred, or we would not be able to issue an unmodified audit opinion because at that point it would be materially misstated. Does that?
I think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's the level that's determined to be significant to the user. If there is something in there greater than 500,000 that shouldn't be, that would be considered significant. If there was something missing, that would be considered too large to be there or not there. Yeah. Okay. So on page 7 of our report, I can report that we did not find any deficiencies in the internal controls that we tested during the audit. And on page 8, we report that there were a few unadjusted differences that are not material, and we can still issue our audit report. Does anyone have any questions about the communication before I give a brief review of the financial statements?
Councillor Coburn, if you have a question online, could you speak up because I can't see you there at all right now?
Yep, no problem. I'm here.
Okay. So I have us flipping over to Appendix A of our report. And it's going to be on page, I think, 2 of my report, page 45 of your agenda. Yep, that's right. Okay. Unlike in prior years, we have qualified our opinion. If you look under the basis for qualified opinion heading, the township was required to adopt Public Sector Accounting Standard 3280, Asset Retirement Obligations, which requires the recognition of legal obligations associated with the retirement of tangible capital assets owned by public sector entities. Management has not yet completed the assessment of the tangible capital assets for potential asset retirement obligations. As a result, it is not possible to quantify the impact of this departure from the Canadian Public Sector Accounting Standards. Additionally, the township accounts for its landfill closure and post-closure liability in accordance with withdrawn Public Sector Accounting Standard 3270, solid waste landfill closure and post-closure liability. As a result, it is not possible to quantify the impact of this departure from Canadian Public Sector Accounting Standards. So in the second paragraph, you will see that in our opinion, except for the asset retirement obligation, these financial statements present fairly in all material respects the consolidated financial statements of the township in accordance with Canadian Public Sector Accounting Standards. It is worth noting that there are other municipalities who are qualifying over the ARO for this year, as they are not at a state to quantify that liability. And there are still municipalities out there that are qualified over tangible capital assets. And that section came into effect 15 years ago. So on the next page, there's an expanded explanation of the responsibilities of the auditor, management, and council. So if we want to turn to the next page, about quarter way down the report, it highlights that management is responsible for the presentation or preparation and fair presentation of the consolidated financial statements. It also highlights those charged with governance are responsible for overseeing the township's financial reporting process. And then the remainder part of the report details the responsibilities of the auditor. Does anyone have any questions at this point about the report before I go over to the statement of financial position? No? Okay. Then if we'd like to turn to page 5 of my report. This is the statement of financial position, or oftenly referred to as the balance sheet. It presents the township financial assets and liabilities at a point in time, December 31st, 2023. Financial assets totaled $27.8 million, of which $24.9 million was cash. There was very little debt of $438,698, of which it's planned to be paid off in about 4 years. So you do have the ability to borrow to finance long-term plans. The total financial assets less liabilities comes to the net financial assets of $19.5 million. It did go down $2.1 million, and that was because of the Elm Street project finance from reserves as budgeted. And then it comes to the total accumulated surplus of $73.3.5 million once you add in the tangible capital assets. If we move to the next page, it's the statement of operations and the transactions for the year. Total revenue of $18.9 million includes all external revenues for both operating and capital. I'd like to highlight that you have likely noticed the other income of $2.1 million is quite a bit higher than budgeted of $1.1, and that's due to the interest income as interest rates can continue to jump through the year, and often municipalities don't budget for interest because it's unknown. Total expenses for the year were $20.7 million. I'd like to remind council that budget does not include amortization of $2.79 million. So if amortization was removed from the actual figures, the actual expenditures would actually be a little bit less than the budget of 18.4. There is an annual deficit as budgeted. Again, if amortization was added back into the actuals, it would be in a surplus. The $1.8 million annual deficit presented on the statement is not the operating surplus. The operating surplus was $924,666, and it was transferred to reserves. moving on to the next statement. The annual deficit of 1.8 million on the previous page is adjusted for amortization and actual capital purchases. So the actual capital purchases in the year were 3 million and the amortization was 2.7 million. It is a good financial indicator that your tangible capital asset additions exceeds amortization for the year. And net financials at the end, net financial assets at the end of the year was 19.5 million. And again, that decrease in the net financial assets is because of the Elm Street coming from reserves as budgeted. I have tried to keep the presentation at a high level overview, so I'm not going to go into the rest of the statements or the notes unless anyone has any specific questions at this time. Is there any questions, or is there anything about the statements or notes that you would like to go over in further detail?
I am not seeing any questions here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for being here. So with that, if there's no further questions or no further discussion, I will call the vote on this one. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Consent agenda. Are there any items on there that anyone wishes to pull? Seeing none. The recommendation is that Council of the Township of Georgian Bluffs adopt the consent agenda for information as circulated and that all actions contained therein are hereby approved. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Thompson, Deputy Mayor Pringle. Is there any discussion? We'll call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Correspondence. We have a letter from Laura Eagles about the short-term accommodations bylaw. Does any member wish to comment on this one? Seeing none, then we are simply receiving this for information. Okay. Committee reports. Recommendation is that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting held on June 19th, 2024 be adopted, including recommendations COW 2024-058 to COW 2024-067. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Winters, Councillor Schuldeis. Is there any discussion, any item that any member wishes to pull from that Committee of the Whole? Councillor Coburn?
Just a question for clarification on 12.1.5. So this is the bylaw to formalize the short-term rental licensing framework. I expected that one to come back this evening, just this evening's council meeting for ratification. And so I'm just wondering, we voted at Committee of the Whole to approve that draft. Is there something more we're waiting on, or I'm just wondering why this didn't come back this evening for final vote on the bylaw.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest that we should pull that one out of there for discussion so that we move everything else ahead. So we are pulling COW 2024-062 from that for discussion after the rest of them. Are there any other items in there that anyone on council wishes to pull? Okay, so we're working with an amended motion now. I'm looking to. Okay, so we've changed that. So the recommendation will now be that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting held on June 19th, 2024 be adopted, excluding item COW 2024-062. I need a mover and a seconder again, or are we amending that one? Okay, so I will call the vote on those items. All in favor? That is carried. And then we need a motion, mover and a seconder on this item specifically, or we're just speaking to it? Okay, so I'm reading that full motion now. Okay. So the recommendation here is whereas by way of resolution COW 2023-150, council directed staff to prepare a licensing program to regulate short-term rental accommodations throughout the township. And whereas staff have developed a draft program in consultation with township risk management and legal teams, now therefore committee hereby supports the draft short-term rental accommodations licensing framework as appended herein, and that a bylaw to formalize the licensing framework be presented for enactment in Q3. Could I have a mover and a seconder now on that item? Councillor Coburn, seconder, please. Councillor Winters. Okay, and I saw Brittany putting her hand up, so I'll turn it over to you for explanation.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton, and through you to council. As outlined in the report, we have drafted a bit of a timeline for moving forward on this portfolio, which includes presentation of the final bylaw this September, or in anticipation of that bylaw this September. We did gather some feedback out of the previous committee of the whole meeting being last week, that there may be some room for some minor tweaks to some of the wording. I have taken that back. We are also going to host a feedback session with our operators to gather more of their feedback and help them feel supported through this transition. We are also continuing to work with Granicus in building the online software platform that will help us welcome and receive applications for licensing through this program. That application will not be up and running until September. So enactment of this bylaw will marry with the timeline by which we can commence receiving applications for the 2025 season. So we will start receiving applications following ratification of this bylaw in September. We just need a couple months to continue to get our ducks in a row to fully onboard the program this fall.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn?
I appreciate that explanation, Brittany. And I, with apologies, I see that we were just passing the framework and the bylaw is to come later. I do have some concerns about the process, and I don't know that now's the time for that conversation, but we have done a fulsome public engagement with both the community and the committee and the operators. And I guess I was looking at the framework that we approved at Committee of the Whole as being not having tweaks to, maybe minor wording changes, but hopefully the substantive parts of that framework are going to remain the same. And I look forward to seeing that bylaw to enact the program in Q3. So thank you.
Brittany, go ahead.
Thank you. And just one addition in response. It is my intention that the framework that you considered in your previous meeting remains almost exactly the same. I do mean minor wording amendments here and there. And we did hear a suggestion regarding potential for an additional fee that could speak to seasonal rentals rather than an annual rental fee. So when I say tweaks, I mean very small tweaks that council would have to approve prior to it making its way into the framework.
Councillor Coburn?
Yeah, so I guess that's what I was getting at. So thanks for that, Brittany. I'm a little confused as to why we would be adding a seasonal fee. That wasn't the direction of council. And I think that would be extremely hard to police, so that people are going to choose the 2-month licensing fee because it's cheaper, but how are we ever going to follow up on whether or not they're opening their doors for business for 4 months or 2 months? So I think to me that's not a minor tweak or a minor wording change, and I didn't see that direction coming from council. So perhaps this is a topic for another council meeting rather than tonight, as I pull that one from the just the committee meeting minutes. Yeah, so I think I guess what I'm saying is it wasn't a direction of council to change that framework in any substantive way. And we do need to have more discussions about a seasonal fee instead. I think we're taking a fairly simple licensing fee framework and making it more complicated than we need to based on one person's wishes who was at the meeting last time. And I'm not sure how, I'm just not sure about that process and how I feel about it.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions around this motion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Staff report. From the Office of the CAO, the recommendation is that council direct staff to enter into a shared services agreement with the City of Owen Sound for the provision of fire prevention services, and that the CAO be authorized to sign an agreement for the provision of shared services as per this report on an annual basis, pending budget approval until such time as the services are no longer required. And that the agreement specifies a day rate for fire prevention services to be provided to the township by the city, and that the township be invoiced on a monthly basis for fire prevention services, and that the city will generally provide fire prevention services to the township on 1 day weekly, and that no more than $50,000 be spent on fire prevention services in 2024. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Thompson, Deputy Mayor Pringle. And I'm looking at CAO.
Through you, Mayor Carlton, thank you very much. This really follows up from direction provided in Budget 2024. It's in regards to an agreement for formalising the shared services that we've had for a number of years with Owen Sound Fire and providing fire prevention services, which are a mandated task for the township of Georgian Bluffs. So it is something which the township needs to do. And we have done that in the past through an agreement for services with Owen Sound. So this is really formalising that approach. The recommendation, a similar sort of recommendation, has been presented to Owen Sound Council and has been supported. So we're looking for the endorsement of this. The budget is already being budgeted for this year. It was part of the budget 2024. So this is really formalising that budget direction.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? Councillor Day.
I support any ways that we can work with other municipalities and streamline our processes. And I'm also just curious about whether or not some, maybe not new necessarily, but increasingly relevant ideas around landscaping for forest fires, if that's part of the programs, looking at our rural folks as well as those who live in more urban areas in terms of fire prevention.
So through you, Mayor Carlton, so the fire prevention officer has a number of duties which are provided for within the Act, but they have a broader role in terms of public education, and that's certainly something we can speak to the fire prevention officer as to how they might wish to roll that out. But their services are available to any member of the public who wishes to receive advice or help or support in terms of managing fire risks on their property, be that rural, be that urban, or be that an industrial or commercial application.
Councillor Scholz and then Councillor Coburn.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the report. Now that was a good read. I have a question for you, more so about budget allocation. I understand that the budget cap for this was set to $50,000. I was wondering, are there any sort of contingencies in place that we've set or that you might have in mind in case this cost would hypothetically exceed the amount of 50,000? Is there something we could do? What are your thoughts?
Thank you for the question through you, Mayor Carlton. So the upset limit of 50,000 was based on the estimated costs that we've incurred over the last few years. We use on average about a day a week of fire prevention officers' duties and have done on a fairly consistent basis since about 2019. It seems to be a level of service which covers our needs under the Fire Prevention Act. and is a sustainable level of service that City of Owen Sound Fire Department can provide to us. The way in which we'd manage this agreement would be a cap on that, and certainly the costs that you see in the agreement don't exceed that 50,000, and so we are able to stop providing services once we've provided that sort of core piece, which we know we can accommodate within this 50,000. So we can keep this within the 50,000 fairly comfortably.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Coburn?
Thank you. My question was around the 1 day a week, and I think you may have answered it, Niall. Who decides if that is the appropriate level of service for our population and our mix of commercial, industrial, and residential? Is 1 day, is that a legislated thing based on a formula, or is that just what we've always done? And is that the right amount of hours a week for us for fire prevention activities?
You, Mayor Carlton. Thank you for the question, Councillor Coburn. So more along the lines of past service level has determined what the service level is under this agreement. So we've basically mirrored what has happened over the last few years in terms of fire prevention responsibilities based on the sorts of activities that that we've seen as a township in terms of supporting our primarily those commercial properties where we undertake inspections on an annualized basis, and the additional educational activities that we do around smoke detectors, for example, and carbon monoxide awareness. So it is very much informed by past service levels. I'm always a little uncomfortable when we secure services into the future based on simply a definition of what we've done in the past. There's no ready gut check to say whether that's the right amount, whether we're doing too much or too little. And that's certainly something which Council has provided direction as part of the Fire Service Master Plan, which needs to be done, which is a holistic process whereby the township determines the sorts of services it requires in terms of fire prevention, including fire prevention education piece, which is the first stop, the first port of call when it comes to fire prevention is actually the educational role and the work of the FPO. And so through the Fire Service Master Plan, there will be a comprehensive look at what service levels the township of Georgian Bluffs wishes to procure from its provider, being ITFD in this instance, in terms of fire protection services and indeed fire response services and emergency services. So the paper that's before you today, the shared service agreement that's before you today, is definitely informed by past service levels. The future service levels will be mandated and dictated to by the Fire Service Master Plan, which we're starting this year and probably wrap up into 2025.
Thank you.
Councillor Winters?
Thank you. And I just want to say I support this. And I think most of my colleagues here tonight have answered some of the questions that I had. One was, I know traditionally prior to 2019, we used to use more than 1 day a week for fire prevention. We had a part-time officer. I know this was a necessity that happened, and this is what it is. But as council, we need to, and the Fire Master Plan falls into that, because we need to set those standards of which we want to do. And we're all sitting here going, hey, is 1 day a week enough? We've never seen in the last 4, 5, 6 years what level of service we've been providing, how many inspections, how many re-inspections. Is 1 day a week enough? Is it for our building department? So those were all questions that I had that I think we're heading in the same direction for. So I guess my real question is there an opportunity for council to see what's going on in fire prevention? Is there a monthly summary, a bi-monthly summary, a biannual summary of this is how many inspections, re-inspections, things that we found, to give us the idea of where we need to be? My other question is I like the report. I like the cost sharing. Is there any idea or way that we can see what that daily rate will be? There's got to be a point where as council, we look back and say, hey, we need to bring in somebody part-time. We need to look at succession planning. We need to do something. I see this as an interim measure myself, but I think we need to look at a bigger picture.
So thank you for the question through you, Mayor Carlton, to Councillor Winters. So yes, actually embedded in the agreement, it's a service fee. So the service fee is $850 a day on a basis of about 52 weeks, 52 days of service provided each year. Very similar to the way in which we've established the costs associated with the building services pilot. That's basically cost plus 15% admin. So we're paying a salary cost broken out on a daily rate, plus a 15% service fee for the administration of that staff person, and so on and so forth. So that's the way in which we've established the cost is exactly the same as we did for the building services pilot. I should note that the day a week will not be provided sort of like every Thursday. We're not going to have an FPO, and similar to the way in which we've operated over the last few years, we're anticipating having a fire prevention officer. Some days we'll have them, some weeks we'll have them 2 days, maybe even 3 days, depending on the volume of work and the nature of work that's required. And other weeks we might not have them at all, to balance out vacations and commitments they may have with Owen Sound Fire. So the 1 day a week is indicative rather than specific. Definitely need to have that conversation around whether the service levels are what we need. And so I look forward to those conversations through the fire service master plan, and hopefully get that kicked off when I get back from my vacation. I think the other question that you asked in regards to having some report back, I think that would be excellent, and certainly I can seek to get that back in the fall, to bring that back to council to understand, what are the broad duties that a fire prevention officer has provided, what's the level of inspection, so on, also how many properties and so on. I could definitely get them to come back and do a presentation.
Councillor Thompson, you have a question?
I don't know if it's a question or a comment. Like, I appreciate the dialogue, but sometimes I get caught up because I'm trying to imagine when we would be using them 3 days a week. And so I think what I'm hearing from my colleagues is more about it would be great to have data, I think. And so, like, the talk is good, the dialogue is good, but I think what we really want is maybe the data. So I wonder if we should, do we think about a quarterly? Could we review quarterly? Could we talk? Because I think it's hard to say. It's hard to set expectations and say, well, 3 times a week. I'm trying to imagine we're going to use it 3 times a week. That seems like an awful lot to me. So I wonder if we just forego it a bit and look towards data. Like let's have where are we? July. Like look at September 30 data or something like that. Quarterly data, and then we can start sort of reviewing what's actually happening rather than projection. I appreciate that we need to start somewhere, so we're not starting with data, but maybe we could move to that.
So through you, Mayor Carlton, yes, no hesitation here, and I think we can bring that report back on a summary of what we've seen today, and then we have an up-to-date summary as we move forward. And it's just shot across the room. We may even be able to just build some of that data straight into the reports that you already see through financial reporting and so on and so forth. Just to clarify that sort of 3 days. So the fire prevention officer, they undertake inspections of all commercial properties in the township, but they do participate in a number of other programs. So we've been very fortunate in working in partnership on a smoke alarm program. Although I believe it's Enbridge, but I'm not. Enbridge. I can't remember who it is, and I apologize for our sponsors that have supported the smoke alarm program over the last few years. So the fire prevention officer helps with the rollout of the smoke protection, smoke detector system program. The other thing they do is they can work with school groups, and we do a couple of school activities each year. And they also work with bylaw on some of the enforcement stuff. So they will go out and visit properties where there's been concerns to help with education and so on and so forth. The nature of that work means there has to be a degree of fluidity to it, both on the Owen Sound end where they're doing the same duties and on our end. So the programming of that day a week is married up with the availability of our own officers, the bylaw needs, when schools want education activities and so on and so forth. So the 1 day a week is an average. The way in which that's managed is based on the needs that we see. It ebbs and flows in and out. But the point taken to bring back data is something I will work on, and we can certainly do that through September or October.
Any further comment, Councillor Winters?
You just in all great dialogue, but I think this is a starting point where council needs to head, because the ITFD provides great service for the municipality. The council sets the direction. And we've been negligent, I guess, in the past, saying ITFD looks after that, ITFD looks after that. Well, we as council, we have data, we can set those levels of service, right? So I think it's a great dialogue tonight. I think we're in the right direction, and it sets the tone. So thank you.
So through you, Mayor Carlton, I will make one brief point to the the response Councillor Winters just made, the point that Councillor Winters just made, is the fire prevention services at this point are being requested by the Township of Georgian Bluffs from the City of Owen Sound. These duties do not extend over the full geographical terrain of ITFD, which is why this is coming to council, not via ITFD board. So this is a service agreement between the Township of Georgian Bluffs and the City of Owen Sound, responding to the Georgian Bluffs area, not the geographical operational area of ITFD. Having said that, to the point that Councillor Winters just makes, ITFD operates on the service levels as established through the Township of Georgian Bluffs through a fire service master plan. And so looking at how fire prevention duties could be realigned in the future with ITFD through our master service agreement with ITFD, informed by the fire service master plan, is an important thing for us to bear in mind. So that's one of the reasons why this is an agreement which will be reviewed on an annualized basis up until the point at which it may no longer be needed, which could be if we're seeing that service now provided for us by ITFD. At this point in time, it's beyond the resources of ITFD to be able to provide, which is why we're leaning on Owen Sound.
Does that answer everyone's question set? I will now call the vote. All in favor? Carried. Moving on to Community and Environmental Services. The recommendation is that policy CES 2024-01 as amended be endorsed to support the creation of a privately maintained road grant, and that staff be directed to accept completed applications effective July 8th, 2024. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Winters and Councillor Day. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Corporate Services. The proposed 2025 budget timeline and guiding principles be endorsed by council. And I need a mover and a seconder on that. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Scholdice. Any discussion? I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Next item is council schedule. Recommendation that report COR 2024-025, the 2025 council schedule be received for information, and that the 2025 council schedule be approved as presented, and that staff be directed to carry out all administrative actions necessary to call the meetings contained herein. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Deputy Mayor Pringle, Councillor Day. Is there any discussion? The one item that I thought of on the weekend, and then I apologize for not sending my question off to staff, was could county council meetings be included on that schedule? And I'm also thinking about Grace Sobel and any other, the library, say, where council members are appointed to committees. Could those be added on?
Thank you, Mayor Carlton, through you to you. We can certainly include those. We have in previous years. At this point in time, it doesn't look like a lot of committees and Grey County Council have published their dates yet. So I'm just holding off to see when their schedules are finalized. A lot of them should be consistent with last year, but once they're confirmed, we can certainly include them in this calendar so that it's a fulsome picture of your commitments for 2025.
So I would say from county council, we're the second and fourth Thursday of the month. Grace Sobel is always the fourth Wednesday. So I don't see those ones changing. I really don't know when the library is. Councillor Thompson? So if we could add those, and because I can't imagine those changing, just because they fit so well with everybody else's, all the other municipal council meetings. CAO.
So through you, Mayor Carlton, just to reiterate the clerk's point there, I think what we're looking for at this point, we've arranged the schedule and recognition of those potential conflicts. So there should be no conflicts in here, but we would wait for them to call and then we would populate in here. we wanted to provide a stripped down version of the calendar so that it was very clear where we could see Township of Georgian Bluffs commitments in 2025. You will see in the fall this calendar reissued multiple times, I suspect, as those various other commitments get populated.
Thank you. Carly, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton. Just to add one more thing, the council SharePoint that we're getting up and going, this will be a living document on there. And as dates are populated between here and your Outlook calendars, it will be constantly updated and will include the things that we've discussed.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions by the rest of council? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to bylaws. The first item is whereas council has given consideration to the written comments submitted by the agencies in the decision on proposed zoning bylaw amendment application Z0224 for Mark Mitchell and Sarah May Taylor for property located at 319913 Kemble Rock Road, Kemble. And whereas council has considered oral submissions made at the public meeting, therefore be it resolved that council of the Township of Georgian Bluffs is satisfied that the proposed amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement 2020 and other governing regulations, and that bylaw 2024-037 be read a first, second, and third time, finally passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed with the seal of the corporation, and engrossed in the bylaw book. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Deputy Mayor Pringle and Councillor Scholdes. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. The next bylaw, that bylaw 2024-038 being a bylaw to establish and levy tax rates for the Township of Georgian Bluffs purposes, confirm the County of Grey and school board rates for the year 2024, provide for penalty and interest in default of payment thereof, and establish alternative installments and due dates, be read a first, second, and third time, finally passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed with the seal of the corporation, and engrossed in the bylaw book. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Scholdes, Councillor Winters, is there any discussion? Can I just ask what we ended up with as a blended tax rate? Do we know what that amount is?
So through you, sorry, you're looking for the tax rate or the increase in the tax rate, just to clarify, because the tax rate would be for residentials, a blended rate of 1.236683%.
I guess I'm looking for that blended increase once we've combined. Yeah, sorry.
Apparently my acting deputy treasurer was prepared for that. It is 6.77.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Next item is that bylaw 2024-039 being a bylaw to support the adoption of policy CES 2024-01 in respect of implementing a privately maintained road grant be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed with the seal of the corporation, and engrossed in the bylaw book. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Winters and Councillor Day. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? The next item, that bylaw 2024-040 being a bylaw to permit backyard poultry in residential areas of the township be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed with the seal of the corporation, and engrossed in the bylaw book. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Thompson and Councillor Day. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? Any opposed? That is still carried. Moving on. We have no unfinished business, no new business. Does any member wish to provide a notice of motion? Seeing none, we have no closed session. The confirming bylaw, that bylaw number 2024-041 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council on July 3rd, 2024, be read a first, second, and third time, finally passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed with the seal of the corporation, and engrossed in the bylaw book. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Counselor Thompson, Counselor Shouldice. Is there any discussion? Call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Date of the next regular meeting is Committee of the Whole on July 10th at 5 p.m. Council on July 17th at 5 p.m. If there is no further business, I will now call for adjournment of this meeting. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Deputy Mayor Pringle and Councillor Day, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Good evening, everyone.